Thanks for coming. Yeah, this was the weather we were supposed to have. We were back, it didn't quite work out, but we're happy that it's sunny and it's nice today. Welcome to our Junior Parents Day. Sort of on purpose, we try to keep it as low-key and as interactive as we possibly can. We put together packets for you, and it should have your son or daughter's counselor's name and a card in there. But we put in there some reading we think might be of some interest to you. And today, what we plan to do is review sort of our responsibilities to make sure that you know what has to be done, what will be done with your child, and what your responsibilities are, what our responsibilities are, and try to get everybody sort of on the same page. To be honest with you, everybody gets here for the same reasons. When we work together, it makes a big difference. Without further ado, Chris Fortunato is here, and he'd like to say a few remarks, and then we'll get right into Greg McDonald's talk. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to take a minute or two to welcome all of you, and I know we want to get to the meat of the matter today, talking about the college process, but I'm actually curious to know if people can maybe volunteer. What are some of the feelings that you have right now about the college process for your sons or daughters? How would you describe that?
Lost.
Clueless,
Yeah,
okay.
lost.
There you go. What's that? Lost. Okay. Anybody else?
Comfortable.
All right, there's got to be more.
Torture.
Scared, torture.
Comfortable.
What was that?
Comfortable.
Comfortable, okay. You like hearing that too?
Excited.
Okay. So there are clearly a range of emotions at all ends of the spectrum and all levels of intensity. And obviously, if you are feeling it, your kids, our students are feeling it as well. So there's no doubt, I will own and acknowledge that there's anxieties and stress associated with this process, and will be from now all the way through the decision-making process on their end, your end, their prospective schools' ends, and then the departure time when they are leaving Blair and leaving your lives in a certain kind of way and going on to the next parts of their lives too. But that doesn't have to be what dominates this. I think people talk about college process and they think about stress and anxiety and these things that are outside of our control. There is actually a lot under your control. Not obviously the decisions that individual admissions offices will make in various colleges, but this can be a joyful process. Does anyone believe me on that? All right. Joyful. It will not. Life is not all unicorns and rainbows. I completely understand that. But there can be elements of joy because what we're doing, this part of the process, is part of a larger process here of having our kids figure out the things that they are most talented in, the things they're most excited about, where the best fit might be. And I'm just going to encourage or caution you to think about those things first and foremost. Sometimes people come into, whether it's a boarding school or any school environment, and say, like, I'm just trying to think about how I get my son or daughter into any one of these 7 to 10 colleges. There are more than 7 to 10 colleges out there. There are lots of them. And it's not a cop-out. It's not meaning to say that people should aspire to opportunities that might be wonderful fits for them that will get them to next steps in their lives. But I would hope our goal is to get our students to the best possible opportunity and fit for them. And there are a range of schools that Lou and his staff and our faculty will help your sons and daughters get to. And so there can be joy in discovering what's best for them and joy in discovering who they are throughout this process. We will help manage all the stressors and anxieties. And yes, we're not necessarily wanting you to be on speed dial 24/7, calling about, like, what about this, what about that? But we do want there to be good communication. So when you are stressed or anxious, or your sons and daughters are stressed and anxious, Lou and Britt and Joe and all of our faculty, like, we are here to have those conversations with you, and this can be positive and joyful, and there will be some disappointments. And I think one of the things that Lou and his staff do really well is sometimes have hard conversations about expectation setting. We don't want people to aim low in ways that don't stretch them, but we also want people to be realistic. We live for a lot of schools, a hyper-competitive situation where admit rates are, even if you are the most talented, wonderful, smart person on the face of the planet, as with jobs that you all face, or college admissions or graduate admissions, there are limited slots for really talented people. So we want kids to be realistic, we want them to be appropriately aspirational, and we want to counsel them and counsel you. So this is not about a college placement office, it's about counseling. And so they will get counseling from Lou and staff, they'll get counseling from their academic monitors, their advisors, all of us. And just to reassure everybody, all of your kids will go to college. They will go to really good colleges. And we want to get them to go to really good colleges that are really good for them. And so that means we have to, as Lou pointed out, work together to get to those points. And there might be moments of teeth gnashing and consternation and disagreement from time to time. But at the end of the day, our focus is always going to be what's best for your son or daughter. And we will navigate through any concerns, conflicts, any challenges along the way. So I'm excited about that for them, for you. And I know that this is a lot of work. Be cautious about advice that you get from everyone and his uncle who wants to tell you about how you get your son or daughter into this college or that college, or why this college is not good for them because they knew someone from 10 years ago who went to that college and partied too much, or had a bad professor in a lecture-based class. That's a lot of due diligence, but again, please, close communication, and then we'll do the kind of vetting and due diligence for all of you to try to get those best fits to happen. And again, there is joy. You've got good people, all of us around here. Joe up there, who unfortunately can't be here today because of a family emergency. You've got really good people who are going to take care of your sons and daughters. And you can always let me and everybody else know when you're not feeling that way, and we will get to the points that we need to. So enough of my talking, because there's actually a lot of work to be done too, so I'll let Lou get to that. Have fun, good luck, and we will all be great, and your kids will be great and get to great places. So I'll leave you there. Enjoy the day. Thanks.
Greg McDonald, I've known Greg McDonald for a long time. Greg is the VP of Enrollment Management at Lafayette. Before that, he was Director of Admission at the University of Rochester. Before that, he was Case Western Reserve. And he's here. He's our relief pitcher because our other person who was scheduled for the original one couldn't make it. There are a lot of people who are now in committee. And Greg is so important at Lafayette. He doesn't have to do the committee work anymore. He just watches it all unfold. But he does have some really interesting perspectives, and I'm excited for him to be here and talk. He met with your sons and daughters last night, where the kids had a chance to ask him pretty much anything that they wanted, which was great. But let's get Greg here to talk. He's probably a lot more interesting than I am. Greg.
Good morning, everybody. I am actually the relief pitcher. I did this event 11 years ago when I was living in upstate New York, and this seemed like a nice trip down south. I came down, but when I moved to the Lehigh Valley 5 years ago, actually I spoke again about 5 years ago, but I said, Lou, I'm so close. Let me be your, when we get a storm or we get bad weather, let me be the guy when your speaker cancels. I'll be there for you. So about 2 weeks ago, I got this phone call. And he said, do you remember that you offered to come on short notice? And, well, I had to live up to that. But this is an event that I look forward to. And I actually had the pleasure of bringing my wife and 2 children, 2 of our 3 children. I asked Lois, I said, of all the deans and VPs that have stayed with you, who's actually brought their family? And she said, you're the first. So we're proud of that. Had a delightful chat with your sons and daughters last night. Wouldn't it be interesting if any of the parents are sitting in the exact same seats that their kids are in?
That would be interesting.
And they had great questions, okay? And they knew the better the questions, the better I was going to be. So I hope that you'll have some good questions for me. As I said to them last night, we can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. The easy way is if you have some good questions. I'm here not to tout or sell for my institution that butters my bread. I'm here to serve Blair Academy today. I'm here to make you feel more in control of the experience, not the process, the experience that you're going through. My wife and I have a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, so that means we've just gone through the process twice. The third one is actually in the room right now, which worries me a little bit because I'm about to give you lots of advice, and she's going to repeat it back to me at every dinner for the next month, telling me what was factually correct and incorrect. That's always a danger of having a really smart daughter in 10th grade, which I'm sure many of you have as well. But I will tell you the process, the experience for us as parents versus enrollment managers was phenomenal. It was a lot of fun, and including our second one who just made his decision last week. We're thrilled for him. Those of you who have multiple children, you know how different they are. He was the one that said to me about a year ago when we were starting this experience, I said, how much advice do you really want from me? And he said, Dad, you're one of the greatest minds in college admissions. Why would I not listen to you? And I thought, did you really say that? And then my daughter and I got into it a couple of weeks ago, and I reminded her what Sam said, and she said, Dad, he was kidding. Like, you believe that? So you know how difficult teenagers can be. I think I'm talking to some people who know what I'm talking about there. I want to start with some advice that your children had for you. I told the children, your students, your kids, that I was speaking with you this morning, and I said, what advice do you want me to pass along to your parents? Because I'm going to be with them tomorrow morning. And they asked me to quote, it is the Super Bowl tomorrow, so they asked me to quote that great American philosopher, Aaron Rodgers.
I did not know that.
Well, Aaron Rodgers had this famous quote a few years ago talking to the fans of Green Bay. What did he say?
Relax.
Relax. Okay? Just relax. How many of you as parents have been through this experience before with your children? Okay. About half of you. How many are going through the process for the first time as parents? Okay. It's changed, okay? Many of us had the experience of going to college 20, 30, or 40 years ago. A few things have changed. This is my 25th year in the profession, and it has changed since I started. It has changed since my first time speaking here 11 years ago. There's been some major changes that have changed the process, and that's what I wanted to get across to you this morning. How have things changed? What are your kids going through, and how can you be most helpful in this process? 25 years ago, when I was starting this business, I was fresh out of graduate school, and I remember drop-off day. Drop-off day in August is really the best day for any admissions officer, because that's the day where you really don't have to do much. Orientation people are doing all of it. Res Life is really busy, but you just sit back and rest on your laurels. You just sit back and watch the class arrive. And I started, at the end of the day where it's they ring the bell and, it's time for parents and students to say goodbye to each other. Those of you who've done this know it can be an emotional experience. I'm seeing a lot of smiles. And at 26 years old, I was seeing these parents break down and weep. And I was thinking, what is their problem? Like, what is causing them to be so full of themselves? Why do they put themselves in this position? And why are they thinking it's all about them? And then something strange happened to me. And I became a parent at 29. And I started to realize, yeah, okay, that's what this is about. 2 years ago, when we dropped our first off to college, I was bawling before I got to the first stop sign, 5 houses away. A dog was approaching our car, and the middle son said to older son, "Say goodbye to Sparky, you're not going to see him for 9 months." And it hit me. And it wasn't going to be 9 months, it was going to be more like 9. And it hit me. And then the embarrassment of the tears with a car full of 5 family members, it was awkward. So, and we were the family that actually didn't get, as soon as we moved in, we had to leave. My son was so afraid I was going to fall apart again. We had to leave and miss all the stuff for parents. And I was thinking also, he's at a liberal arts college in New York City, and I was thinking, if I leave, I was emotionally spent. I was just exhausted. And I was thinking, if I leave now, I can beat all the traffic. And got home, and I took a 3-hour nap in the afternoon because I was so emotionally drained. So A little bit about me, as my daughter would say, TMI, way too much information about that. But I wanted to set the stage that the anxiety that you're feeling is real. I heard you share with the headmaster some of the feelings that you have. I wrote them down. I know you all heard it. It was just a few minutes ago. But the first 5 things mentioned were all pretty negative, right? Who said clueless? Yeah. Everyone else is feeling that way too. Lost, scared, torture, fear. And then someone said comfortable. Who came up with comfortable? Thank you. Yes. Yes. And someone said excited, right? That turned the room a little bit. And this is an exciting time in a young person's life. As I said to your sons and daughters last night, you know, this is their first time to make some really important decisions. You know, I said to them, welcome to adulthood. You know, many of them are feeling under the weight. If they're at Blair, they are taking a very rigorous course load. You know, they are getting, you know, as close to a college experience as they could possibly get right now. And next year, under the weight of a certain number of applications, they're going to be feeling a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. But I said, this is the start of your adult life, right? We're all managing lots of things right now. But this is the first time that they're doing it sort of more on their own, making really important decisions. So as we get into this, I wanted to actually, I usually close with some reading, but I wanted to make, or I forget to mention these 2 books that were really important to me as a parent when my wife and I were going through this experience for the first time. The first one, maybe some of you have read it already if you've gone through this process, Crazy You, Andrew Ferguson. If you want to bring some levity and some humor into this process, start with that book. Crazy You. And it's you as in university. Andrew Ferguson. It's about 3, 4 years old now. But the book that I recommend, if you want to give your sons or daughters a really nice graduation gift and a good book for them to read next summer, beyond the required reading that they're going to have as first-year students, I strongly recommend a book by a Hamilton sociologist professor named Dan Chambliss, and that's How College Works. And the premise of his book is, it's a strong case for small liberal arts colleges, but, you know, Lou and Joe, Britt, myself, we all see kids go off. You never really know who's going to make it. It's not always the students who are best prepared academically. Chambliss's argument or theory is those students who make a strong connection with a friend or 2 and with one faculty member are most likely to be successful and persist and go on to graduate. Those kids who don't make that connection early can sometimes flounder. And he goes on to say, and I know you have some very nice new residence halls here, if your son or daughter end up in an old residence hall, think of Souls, McKean, Gates, the types of residence halls that we all lived in, double rooms, long halls, bathroom at the end, kind of old, maybe have air conditioning, maybe don't have air conditioning. He said, in his opinion, the older buildings are the best for first-year students. And then why is that? And when you're writing the checks for these places, you might be thinking, is this really the best for my son or my daughter? Why are those old buildings with all those double rooms, why are they the best? More open doors. A lot of the new buildings, I'm really into residence life now, that's really not part of my remarks, but a lot of the newer buildings are apartment style. What does that mean? It actually means more closed doors between students. So the more open doors, the more chances they have to meet other students and to make those connections that are really important. Students leaving Blair have a bit of an advantage, or perhaps a significant advantage, of already having made that transition. That's why they're here, that transition from home. They're academically very well prepared, but they still need to make those connections. So those first few calls home, might not want to ask about classes. You might, who are you meeting? How's it going? Those connections are really important. So, what has changed since many of you went through this process? Obviously, the information age, right? When I started this business, it was just like when I went through this in the 80s. Kids were filling out applications with pens and paper, putting it in an envelope, putting a stamp, and mailing it up. Well, we all know that has changed. Living in the information age should have made this experience of going to college easier. Has it? It's not made it easier. Because the process now, the experience now, is less predictable than it ever was. And who knows that better than anyone else? That guy right here, that guy right there. Joe and Lou know how unpredictable this process has become. And my guess is you probably have some questions on why it's become less predictable. Okay? Can I ask those in the room who went to college in the 70s, how many, if you can remember, how many schools did you apply to? Yes, sir? 7. Wow. 3. 5. 4. 7 the high water mark? 3? Yeah. Can I ask, were they all within 100 miles of home? Pretty much?
Yeah.
No. Yes? Yeah. No? Okay. In the 80s, those went to applied to college in the 80s. Average number of schools you applied to, if you can remember?
7.
7? 5?
4.
1, early decision, yep. 3, okay. Okay, fast forward. Students applying to our institution now are usually applying, if they're not early decision, usually applying to 9 other schools. Okay, so 10 is the average, So what has that done? Have you ever noticed this is the time of year where a lot of colleges, you'll read in the New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, all these colleges are another record year for applications, another record year for applications. Lafayette just crossed 8,000 applications. We're thrilled. Okay. Do you know that the actual demographics in this part of the country, in the Northeast, the number of high school graduates, 18-year-olds, is going this direction? But we're all having record pools. Why? Common App is part of it. Kids are applying to more schools. Why? Process is less predictable. Any in the banking business?
Super cheap.
It's cheaper to apply, perhaps, fee waivers, other things. What's really happening? Students are hedging, right? They're absolutely hedging their bets because the process is less predictable. Okay? Joe, Lou, Britt, they won't give your sons or daughters a number. Unless, do you give them a number?
No.
Okay. And I'm not going to give you a number of schools to apply to, but you can help your sons and daughters. If you get the sense that they're applying to too many schools, you can ask them, why are you applying to that last school? And if they can't tailor their application for the 7th school, 8th school, 9th school on the list, that's an indicator they really shouldn't be applying to that school. Okay? As I told the students last night, we read everything you send. I think there's a perception if we're getting applications of 8,000 or 10,000. Many of the research universities now are over 20, 22,000. The Ivies are north, I think, of 30,000 now. Those applications are being read, top to bottom. And sometimes the people reading the applications are feeling they're putting more effort into the students who are completing them. Usually not a good indicator, not a good sign for the student. It's really a sign to those on the committee, that kid's over-applied. The kid might not be running the best search for them, or they're using the common application and then they know they can submit 5 more applications quickly and easily. If you're only applying to schools with single-digit acceptance rates, and you know who they are, it's going to be a stressful process. You know, as the headmaster shared at the beginning, you guys, you can really help your kids, you have to keep an open mind. Okay? There is so many opportunities out there. There are so many great colleges with over a 50% acceptance rate. They just tend not to be in this part of the country. Okay? But if you're, I told the students last night, you're not going to be the first class, the first graduates from Blair not to get into college. Right? And look at the profile. Look where classes have gone most recently. Those are the schools that your sons and daughters are going to go to. The only question is, we don't know who's going to which schools right now. So, before I get into your questions, I want to wrap up with one inside the admissions office tidbit that I think you need to be aware of, because this did not exist 25 years ago when I started doing this, and it didn't exist 35 years ago when many of you were applying. And that's something called an acronym that we use, DI, also known as demonstrated interest. What is demonstrated interest? We're starting to see some reporters and journalists start to comment and report on this. How many have heard the term demonstrated interest? Okay. Those of you not heard the term, please raise your hand. I just want to get a sense. Okay. So, when you applied to college 30 years ago, 25 years ago, the best way to demonstrate interest in that college was to submit the damn application. That's really what you needed to do. That has changed, okay? As we're in the information age, we have other ways of tracking the interest that you demonstrate in the institution. And I apologize for that. I sincerely apologize that our experience, our process has become so unpredictable, so convoluted, that we have to track these types of things. So what are we tracking to demonstrate interest? We look, when we're reading an application, we look to see, did a kid visit campus? My institution places a high value on the admission interview. Not required, strongly recommended. We like to see if a kid is interviewed. That's the ultimate form, in our opinion, of demonstrating interest. And we're very clear about that. We do the fair here in the spring. We visit here in the fall. We do note if we see a student at all those things. Boarding students have a slightly different challenge. During the academic year, although you do have some lovely long breaks, winter weekend, I'm told, is that in 2.5 weeks in March? Is that right? Yeah, Luke gets very quiet when I ask him about all the time off he gets.
The term time off is relative.
Yeah. For somehow he always seems to call me when he's on South Beach in March, and I'm getting ready to mail out decision letters. So you and your students have to use your time really carefully, because your time with your students is to a degree limited. So don't go overboard with this idea of demonstrated interest. Okay, it's plain and simple. For most places, a campus visit is really it. And when you think about the decision that you're about to make, or excuse me, that your students are about to make, of course you're going to want to make a visit. They want to step foot on campus. They want to get a feel to see if there's a good fit for the place. So I'm preaching to the choir here. But if a school says to you that interviews are optional or non-evaluative, don't believe them. Okay? There are no non-evaluative interviews, I'm sorry. There are no non-evaluative sessions. You guys are evaluating me right now. I'm evaluating you right now. That's a normal human tendency. If a school says we have offer non-evaluative interviews, if your kid does really well in that interview, there's a note going into that file. Someone's going to the database and making a few comments, and vice versa. Okay? If something extreme happens, a good or bad impression, you're going to make a note of it. And why would a kid in today's day and age want to do anything that doesn't count, right? Everyone's too busy. If it matters, they're going to do it. And something like this, if a school says we want to interview you, that's an indicator they want to build a relationship with you. They want to get to know you. Okay? That's a long introduction. Yes, please.
So the school says it's optional. How should you take that? Not about the non-valued part, but if they just say it's optional, do they mean it or not?
We go one step further. We strongly encourage it. I don't think we could be any clearer than that. Why wouldn't you, if it's optional, why wouldn't you want to have a personal connection, right? It's really important. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it's with an alum, if it's here at Blair. I think there's interviews tomorrow here.
All day.
Yeah. Some schools will come and do it, but it's not just us interviewing the kid to see what sort of contributions they're going to make to our community. It's a chance for the kid to interview us and ask some really interesting questions. We write down what questions did the kid ask. It's a sign of how well prepared they were for this. So I would say, in my opinion, I don't consider optional for such an important decision. Yes, sir.
So this is probably an obvious question. When you visit a school, is it a campus tour? Do they know you're there? Do you have to call ahead and say, we'd like to visit the school, can you set up a tour?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know you, as parents of juniors, you guys are just starting to map out what you're going to be doing in March. Yes, I strongly recommend always calling ahead. Even better if the student does it. You know, you guys are not the pilots of this. You're the co-pilots. So again, as a parent of teenagers, I know it's hard to get them to do that. But if you have a son or a daughter who is willing to take the reins and truly pilot it, definitely do that. But yes, call ahead, set up an itinerary. A lot of times you're doing this online, and it's depending on how the office is organized, you're clicking off boxes. Some schools will have, usually a tour and an information session is standard. That normally takes anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours. Then we live in a customized world now, right? So maybe a class, maybe lunch with the student, maybe a meeting with the faculty member, meeting with the coach. It really depends on the institution, what they're able to do. And it's also a reflection of how many visitors do they have a year. You know, if this is a small school, you know, in the Midwest that might only have 5,000 visitors a year, you know, you may have a long list of things to do. If this is a big university in the metropolitan area, and they're in the volume business, they might only be doing a tour and a group session, and sort of moving them through that way. Right. Yes, ma'am.
You said that visiting the schools is important, and that the school takes that into consideration. That's a sign of interest.
Demonstrated interest.
But when kids are applying to so many schools, it's, I don't know, what we always did was we sort of said, go look at a big, go look at a medium, go look at a small, sort of urban, suburban, and then wait until you get in. And if you get in, then you can go and look and decide. But you're saying that that's not the way to do it. But how do you go see 10 schools?
You plan ahead. You use your time wisely. So you're starting in March. You really have 9 months to complete these visits. And we see families doing 10 visits on one trip. If we're the 9th or 10th school, by the time they get to us, they're usually not talking to each other. So I don't recommend 10 schools in 1 week, but you could do 10 schools over the next 9 months quite easily. I don't recommend 2 schools in a day. I do recommend, if you're devoting a week to a college trip, 5 schools, and find a museum, find a golf course. Lou and I would find a golf course. Find something other than what you're in that town. I've seen people writing about this, but make it fun. With my 2 older sons, very different kids, I loved it. I'm in the admissions business. I love being in other admissions offices. I love that part of it. But the conversations that we had between campuses and on these trips, we all know, you get a kid in the car, you know, you get them to put their phone away, that's quality time, right? That's real quality time. So, you know, find a way to make that trip enjoyable. And don't overdo it. Yes?
Speaking of trying to visit over the next 9 months, is it seen any differently from your viewpoint, not from the experience of us, because summertime obviously offers a different campus experience, but does it matter if a family visits in your perception, summer or?
No.
Okay.
You're also busy. You visit when you can.
Okay.
You know, and right now, you know, as the list starts to come together, you got to start forming some trips that make sense geographically, right? I tell you one nice thing about visiting in the summer, you get professional tour guides. These are tour guides who are hired to make the campus come to life when there might not be any life on that campus. And they're getting pretty good at their craft if they're doing it 3 times a day, 5 days a week, from Memorial Day to Labor Day. Okay? So no, it makes no difference to us. It's really, you do when you can. And have a talk with your son or daughter before, hey, there's no classes here today. You know, it's going to be a quiet campus. Let's keep that in mind. I would say those are important visits to decide as you narrow down to the fall, as you narrow down where you want to make another visit to sit in on classes. Those are the 3 or 4 schools that you're deciding if you're going to go early to or not, if you're deciding what's going to be on the final list. Yes, sir.
So let's say you're doing your, tour over spring break or maybe summer or something, and you're looking at big, small, city, rural, that sort of thing. But why, at that point, if you go into an interview, they're going to say, why this school? And at that point, you're just fact-finding. So what do? So you just do your tour first and then do the off-campus interview with an alumnus?
It's up to the kid. The kid has to decide when they're ready to do the interview. And that's perfectly...
But if you're just exploring...
Well, then you might not be ready to do the interview. So you would do it later with an alum. I would say, I had some pretty inquisitive kids. You can ask that, say, I'm early in my search, and I have a few questions. Kids should always write their questions down. Okay, they shouldn't be worried about, have a folio, write 3 questions down, and then that will fill up, 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the interview. What does that tell the interviewer? They're prepared. They've given some thought. It kind of takes a little wind out of the sail of the interviewer. After a great interview, you turn to the kid, any questions? Nope, I'm good. See ya. That's 1 or 2 questions to humor the interviewer. And a kid could say, I'm early, I'm visiting because this is my impression of the place. Is this your impression? Yes?
What do you suggest for follow-up, email, thank you notes, tour visits to do?
Yeah, the common courtesies are nice. Yeah, the kids who are well coached in this business, in this process, send them. It's not an imperative, but I think it should be driven by the kid, if possible. Common courtesies are nice. Unfortunately, they're not that common. So a kid can separate. When we get a lot of them, they go to the file. It says this kid's organized, taking it seriously, and it's an indicator that we're on the list. An application is likely.
Email okay or handwritten?
There's no rules on that, and that's my opinion. If my friend from Bucknell was here, he might have a different view on it. It's nice, but not an imperative. You're asking almost as good a questions as your kids last night, so that's a good thing. Yes, right here.
You said there's no such thing as optional. In a different direction, some schools have SAT or ACT optional. Is it really optional? And I'm not sure if I had that.
We were SAT optional, ACT optional 20 years ago, 25 years ago, for a 3-year period. Then we went back. I've never worked at a test optional school. I think Luke could probably share more on that, or Joe.
It's certainly optional, but I would also tell you that everything, as I tried to put forth in that essay about you are not your scores that I've included in here, everything is in context with everything else. So, for example, if a kid from central Pennsylvania who goes to a public high school who may or may not have ever been out of the state, whose parents did not go to college, applies to Bowdoin College, test optional, everyone's going to know that probably the kid's overall background would be the reason why standardized testing is not going to be a mark of excellence for him. It's just not. There's no stronger correlation between test scores and the family income. That is it. The higher the income, the higher the scores. So, but if a kid is from the Upper East Side, New York City, and the kid has had every advantage, and you know, the expectation, I think, it may not be stated anywhere, but the expectation from admissions people would be, okay, this kid has probably been test prep since the 7th grade. He must have crappy scores because he's not sent it. Now, I can't say that happens all the time, but optional standardized testing has proved, if you've seen the longitudinal studies at places like Bates and Bowdoin, there's no correlation between those who submit scores and those who don't submit scores in terms of their actual performance. Okay, but it's a wonderful way to track kids from underserved backgrounds to schools that otherwise they might not look very good in the applicant pool. So it is optional for kids, you know, but probably not for our kids. Why? This is in general terms. They're always specific, but why would it probably be optional for our kids? Because a lot of them come from pretty affluent families. A lot of them have had extraordinary opportunities academically, you know, and if anyone should do well, it should be our kids. And they do well. They do fine. And it almost never is an issue. You know, and the kids who get 5.0s and above almost always have representative standardized testing that matches what their academic record would suggest. Kids who have 3 5s and 3 0s at Blair, there aren't many of them. But if they're there, their standardized testing is typically reflective of their academic achievement. And it's almost in keeping, and I can assure you that when admissions people read files, they look at a transcript, they look at rigor, as Greg said to your kids last night, that's the first thing they look at, and then they look at testing, and almost always, there are always exceptions, but almost always, the kids' scores are representative of the academic performance in the classroom. And then, you know what they do? They keep reading everything. They move to my letter of recommendation or Joe's letter, and then they move to the teacher recs. And then they look at what the kid has written in his application. But the testing is over. That's it. That's all it does. But if the kid has a 5.4 GPA at Blair, and he has, you know, 400 critical reading, 400 math, 400 writing on the SAT-1, they're going to want to know why. What in the world is wrong here? And if they go in to find that there are things that might explain why the testing is so low, they keep on reading. If there is no reason that they could see why the testing is so far off, then it becomes a red flag. I don't know, that's a pretty long-winded way of answering the question, but I think it's pretty fair.
Lou raises an interesting point about how an application is read. It's kind of like reading the newspaper. We all jump to the sections that we enjoy the most and read it first. Some of us go right to the sports section, right? You know, some of us go right to weather. I like to go to the interview. The interview is always easy to find. It's the back page. It's the last page. That's where I like to start. First person account. And it's optional. Sometimes there's an interview. I want to say, did the kid interview? And the person who met them, what was their impressions? And that kind of sets it up for me the rest of the way. Transcript, I go to next, and then I will tell you, the letters of recommendation coming from the school, you can tell a lot of heart and effort has been put into these letters. They're interesting to read, they're fun to read, and we know the effort that has gone into it, so we put the same effort into it. One more question, then I want to wrap up. Yes?
Just a quick thing. It was start of the junior year, so they weren't really in the process yet. They didn't do the application. So we took our kid around to see some schools very early. So touring and informational session. so of course I hammered my kid to write handwritten notes to everybody. And I'm just curious, do they start a file on that kid before an application has been sent in?
Yeah.
Even if they've gone just for an informational tour slash?
Yeah, typically. We call it the unmatched file.
Okay.
So that means anything that comes in from a student before an application. And then when the application, that gets matched to it.
And would you recommend subsequent, like letters, or like they're really interested in school, to reach out and show any kind of interest, or is that overdue?
You know what, I brought it up, so I might be pushing you to overdoing it. Honestly, if a kid visits in the sophomore year, which we see, it's perfectly fine, or the junior year, you know, they're going to start to narrow their list, right? They're going to start to see some places that weren't right for them. They're looking urban, they're looking large, they're looking small, they're looking rural. But don't overdo the demonstrated interest. And as parents, you know, stay out of it. You know, your kids are gonna, they have good instincts. Their instincts are probably better than you realize. But yeah, use your instincts on this. Don't overdo. For my institution, you know, come visit and schedule an interview. That's really it. Last question. Yes.
On the diversity issues, say for instance, you get a lot of applications obviously from New Jersey.
You mean the great exporter?
Yeah.
Yes.
Best export New Jersey has to a certain extent.
Yes, I would agree.
Do you look at that and say, oh my God, another application from New Jersey, and does it, the applicant from Wyoming or Alaska have a better shot?
That's a good question, and I will tell you, thank you, New Jersey, for keeping Lafayette College open. So two things. One, every great college has to be great in their own backyard first and foremost, right? I visit Easton Area High School. I visit Phillipsburg Area High School. I do Notre Dame. I do Moravian. Why? Because they're really important, okay? And we want to get the message out that our backyard is important to us, okay? That said, we're also looking for geographic diversity. The truth is, in the last 5 years, our tri-state, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, was 2/3 of our enrollment. Our portfolio wasn't diversified enough, if you know what I'm saying. We're a small college, 600 in the freshman class. Right now, we're about 50% New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. But our applicant pool is growing because we put more effort. We're looking at the demographics. We really didn't have any market share in Chicago, in San Diego, in LA, in San Francisco, in Texas, and Florida. So we're recruiting harder everywhere, including New Jersey, including Pennsylvania, including New York, including China. Okay? There was a point 2 or 3 years ago, I was concerned that the applications from China were going to overtake the applications from Pennsylvania. They were getting close. Okay? So did you notice I kind of skirted your question a little bit? It never comes down to a kid from Wyoming versus a kid from New Jersey. And when it does, what really happens, a couple things. Well, this is more information than you really need, but since you asked, we get a yield percent on every single kid. We have these predictive models, and you know, don't think ill of us. You guys do things like this in your businesses too, okay? But let me just say, we'll get a percentage on a given kid. What's the likelihood of that kid coming if admitted? And what is that percentage based on? It's it's 15 or 16 different variables. The GPA, the test scores, the zip code, the home state, the high school. And it actually shows us this kid, if admitted, has an 8% chance of enrolling. Why? Because for us, that kid is probably going to get admitted to Princeton too. Okay? So in this case, if it ever came down to a kid from Wyoming versus a kid from New Jersey, and I got one more offer to make, I'm going to go with the kid with the higher yield potential, and that's probably going to be the kid from New Jersey. So that's as honest as I can be. I can stay through the break, but Lou has quite a schedule, and I want to keep him on schedule. But I want to close with why you should feel sorry for me. As I said to your students last night, There are three key junctures in this process. The first, and we've covered them all this morning, there's nothing else to say. Where to apply, where to get admitted, and where to enroll. And you are in charge, and your students are in charge of two of those three critical junctures. Think about that. I don't decide where the kids are applying. You decide that. Yes, we do decide who's admitted to our institution, the middle part. We don't decide where the kid's enrolling, right? So right now, for the seniors in this country, the admissions offices, those in regular pools, those not already knowing where they're going, we're in charge for the 1/3 of the process. As my daughter can tell you, April is a very stressful month in our house. Why? Because we have 2,000 offers of admission extended, and I only have 600 freshman beds. We have $24 million in financial aid offered, and we only have $10 million in the bank to actually spend. Okay? So that's the part of the process, and we all have stressful jobs, and that's the part that we have to nail. And then, you know, there's a lot of sleepless nights in April in our work. Somehow it all works out. So please remember that. You are in control of this. You're in control of, let's say, 2/3 of this. And enjoy the month of April. Okay? Because you're going to have a nice array of colleges where a kid realized they're admitted. My son and I visited a school in Maryland last week. His third visit, first time visiting as an admitted student, and I wanted him to sort of see the campus on his own. I dropped him off. I went away for 2 hours. I came back. But as I dropped him off, I said, remember, now you're a buyer, you're not a seller. Remember that. And your students are going to be buyers in April. We've admitted you. Now you're going to make a great decision. Okay? Okay, last question.
But relating to what you said, early decision obviously is the greatest way to express interest. But what can we do to a school that's early action that doesn't have an early decision? Is there anything we can do to say this is my son's #1 choice?
Applying an early action school?
Yeah, they don't offer early decision, so you can't demonstrate that this is my #1 choice.
Well, no. Yeah, give your
Sometimes
word.
that works.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you're going and showing you're visiting and you're interviewing, if they offer interviews, I think that demonstrates interest. Everyone else, I know that everyone else is doing that, but you know, those are the basics. I wouldn't try to stand out in ways that are inappropriate.
That's where we can help you as well. That's when we're getting on the phone and advocating for your son or daughter in the early process. That's one of the things you're paying for here, is that we're working the phones a little bit.
A little bit?
A little bit.
Even if it's from South Beach.
They are.
We're not going to get away with that. We do make our calls on the road. So, but listen, Greg, thanks a million for coming and speaking for us, especially coming out of the bullpen like that. Nice work. Let's give Greg.